This morning, I'm going to try something pretty ambitious. We are looking to tackle possibly 4 chapters. Now, you know what I'm like with like 10 verses, okay? So I do hope you got the all-church email and you brought your lunch. And feel free to just take it out anytime, but I would say, why don't you wait till about 1 o'clock, and then we'll hit our stride about that point. We're gonna go at that, and we're gonna spend a lot of time here in the actual Word. So I hope you have a Bible around you, one in your hand. Your device would work, but there may be some moving around, and you might want to look at it from a larger perspective than what you could get on your screen. So if you would, I would love it if you used your actual hardbound or whatever bound it is, Bible that's there. Also, I hope that you received an outline that you can look from. I may be reading at some point and just stop and tell you the story, the actual narrative, the story that I happen to be reading. I've been wrestling with a few things. I got something in my eye, and so if I all of a sudden shift and just start telling the account, you've got your Bible, fact check me. I feel good about it. You go ahead and just get after it. I know we're really into that these days. So let's go ahead and do that. I want to on your outline. For maybe it's summer and a lot of people are gone, and maybe you've been gone and missed a couple. So let me get you up to speed. We decided early on that this summer we wanted to do a series, and we wanted to tackle the life of David. Because he is one of the most written about people in all of Scripture, it really is hard to cover his life in the amount of weeks, even though you'd say, well, that's a lot of time, Mark. But there is so much here. And if we're to really plumb some of the depths of David's heart and his life, there are so many incredible subtleties that we are going to have to explore. And today is going to be one of those days. And so just to get you caught up, look at your outline, if you will. Here's our review and background. Long before, this is all taking place about 1,000 years before Jesus shows up. And Israel wanted a king. And so what they did is they went to the prophet the mouthpiece of God is the prophet. His name was Samuel. And they said, we want a king like everybody else. Now, whenever you hear those words in just about in any place, you can be in trouble, okay? Whenever you hear, we want this like everybody else, because as believers, we have been called out of everybody else. We have been called out to not trying to perfectly fit in. And when we try to do that, we get into all kinds of trouble. Well, God spoke through the prophet Samuel, and he said, this is a big mistake. And they said, we don't care. Second thing you don't ever want to do. I know what the Bible says, but I'm different. It's different for me. This is a different scenario. This is a different time. It's not as Victorian now as it used to be. It's not as archaic. You know, we live in a different world right now. I would challenge you, I would caution you, be very, very careful with those two things. But that's what Israel did. And so God said, okay, you want a king? I will grant you, as he often does. When somebody persists in rebellion and they say, I want this, I want this, I want this, finally God will often just say, as you wish, take it. And let's see where this goes. And so he gave them the king that they had asked for. And it was a king named Saul, and he was head and shoulders taller and better looking, and that's what they wanted. And they got their king, even though the warning was, it could go and it will go very bad with him. He will tax you. He will dominate you. He will use his power. But again, they didn't care. And so after a certain amount of time and all of these things started to take place, Saul began to use his power for himself. And he rebelled against God. And when God asked him to do things, he thought he had a better idea. And so he would go his own way. And we see this in the earlier chapters, certainly back in chapters 10 and on, 1 Samuel chapter 10 through 15, you will see this taking place. And God gets to a certain spot where he tears the kingdom away from Saul. And he said, I'm going to give it to one who is better. This time, you were Israel's king, but now I'm going to put my king in there. And it's not going to be from outward appearance, but I'm looking to a heart, as Rob just prayed about a minute ago. I'm looking for someone that has a heart that is so deep, that loves me so much, that will never forget who the real king of Israel is. And David never did that. He never wondered. He never thought, well, God's there, but I'm really the king. David always knew, and you could see this in his pursuit of God. In his questioning and prayers, you see it. David wrote more than half the Psalms. And you'll see it as you read these Psalms, his cry to God for answers, his cry to God. And some of them are raw. Some of them are very, very raw prayers. He'll ask God to crush his enemies' teeth with gravel. It's his equivalent of he's cussing in his prayers, man, is what he's doing. And yet somehow God says, I love those prayers. I love those prayers. They're not right necessarily, and that's the hard part of the book of Psalms, because sometimes he prays things that we would go, yeah, that was okay then, and it was honest and it was authentic, but that's not exactly right. But here's the bottom line. God put his prayers in the Bible, not mine, not yours, okay? So God loves the prayers of David, and he loves David's heart. And so he puts this little boy, and he anoints this little boy at the time. He's 13 or 14 years old, and he's a shepherd, sends him back to the fields because there is a whole lot that has to happen before this little shepherd boy becomes the king of Israel. But in my wisdom, I look at that, and you know what it feels like to me on that one? That's like telling your kid you're going to Disneyland in 6 months, right? Every parent that's ever tried that knows what a huge mistake that is. You don't tell them to the night before, right? Because you don't want to have to live with it. Well, and with David is seemingly just engaging in this, but wondering, if I'm the anointed king of Israel, then why do I have to go back to my father's sheep? And why do I do this and that? And why do I have to be out in the wilderness and what? And he's got lots of questions, and you'll see those often in the book of Psalms. There are actually 6 Psalms of the desert. And so if you read those Psalms, if you want to scribble some down, two of those Psalms come right out of the passage that we're going to read today. One of them is in 52, Psalm 52, and I believe it's 18 is the other one. Yeah, Psalm 18. And so we're going to look, and so what's so cool is when you read this account that we're going to read, you can later go back and read Psalm 18 and know exactly what David was feeling in here. And so we're looking at this, and God places his man the second time as the second king of Israel. And then we saw in chapter 17, he encounters the Philistine champion. His name was Goliath, and David takes him down, not of his own abilities, but he knows. Here we go again. David knows it was God that does this. We're going to see that again today. But then the people begin to sing songs about David, and they write these songs, and they say, Saul's good, but David, oh my gosh, he's amazing. And it breeds this incredible jealousy inside of Saul. And it starts to grow, and that jealousy leads him to a point where he determines in his own heart that he's going to kill David, God's anointed. And so Saul will start doing these things. He'll go to mediums. He'll go to witches, and he'll try to encounter, because God's not speaking to him. And rather than repenting to God, he'll go another direction, but he's going to try to hang on to this. And his jealousy leads him one day to coming up with some actual plans for how to kill David. The first one we looked at last week is he was going to use war. And he said, I'm going to put him in the front lines and I'm going to send him into some fierce battles. But every time he did it, it backfired. And David just won every battle with his men. And so his fame, his legend just grew with the people. And so that didn't work. And then Saul said, well, I'll give him my daughter for marriage, and then I'm going to tell her to kill him, basically in his sleep. We'll just kill him. But his daughter falls in love with David, just like everybody else, and he's angry about that. And then he says, I'll take my son, Jonathan. Jonathan surely will fight for me because it's going to be his throne when I'm gone, right? That's what the king does. He gives it to his son. And so Jonathan will take it. But Jonathan's heart becomes one with David, and he loved him as he did himself, the Bible says. And he tells David, I know you are the anointed. I know you're the anointed. Would you have a place for me as your second in command? Can you imagine? I'd love to meet this guy that would hold these things so loosely. But Jonathan does that. When his father finds out about it, he not only tries to kill David, but he tries to kill Jonathan, his own son. And so he begins to throw spears at them. He's thrown 2 spears at David, and David gets away. He dodges and ducks, and he gets away. And that's where we pick it up today. He is fleeing right now. He is seeking sanctuary right now on your outline there. And he's going to go and he's going to seek it in cities out towards the outlying areas. We're going to see him in caves and even in the wilderness. And I'm picking up in chapter 21. So David is on the run, and David went to the priest Ahimelech at Nob. Great name for a city. I know a lot of people have come from there. And Ahimelech was afraid to meet David. Sorry, I call people Nobs. I don't know where that even came from sometimes. That's not a good thing. And so David, he said to him, Ahimelech, the head priest, why are you alone and why is no one with you? And David answered the priest Ahimelech, the king gave me a mission, but he told me, don't let anyone know anything about the mission I'm sending you on or what I've ordered you to do. I've stationed my young men at a certain place. Now, what do you have on hand? David says, give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever can be found. So in other words, what David's doing is he's lying. Now, that doesn't work real well. We need to keep this one out of Kidsbridge. This is not a good one to teach your kids that you can lie. Go ahead and lie. Go up to the pastor, tell him you didn't have breakfast. Maybe he'll give you a little something out of the pantry. This is not what you do. And yet this is what David did. Now, I suppose if it were me, I know how I would have played that with my parents. I would have said, well, because you'll see later if you were to read through this, David said, I had to run. It was such an urgent mission. Well, that's true. I had to run. He's throwing spears at me. So that part is true. I am running, but he is presenting this lie, in essence, to this priest. Because he's hungry and he has nothing. He literally drops everything and he runs from the presence of Saul. And so he asks him here, take some liberties here, but he asks him, do you have anything to eat? And the priest, all he has is the bread. All he has is communion, if you will, communion bread. It was not communion, but it was a special bread that they used at the altar. And so he said, I've got this bread. It's kind of old. I'm going to refresh it anyway. So if you'd like this bread, you can have this bread. And then David says, great. That would be great. Do you have a weapon by any chance? This is getting a little dicey here. And while all of this is happening, look at verse 7. One of Saul's servants detained before the Lord was there that day, and his name was Doeg the Edomite. Now, whenever you come across a name like Doeg the Edomite, you just know the guy's bad, right? I mean, come on. This is just a bad, bad man. He is Saul's chief shepherd, and he happens to be watching this. David knows him because David's been in the palace, and he's going, oh, this is bad. So here's your question. Was David telling a lie to kind of keep Abimelech in the dark? so that he really wouldn't know. We don't know. But no matter what, the ends doesn't justify the means. And so he says in verse 8, David said to Ahimelech, "Do you have a spear or a sword on hand? I didn't even bring my sword or my weapons since the king's mission was so urgent." And the priest replied, "The sword of Goliath, the Philistine whom you killed in the valley of Elah, is here wrapped in a cloth behind the old ephod. If you want it, take it for yourself. Then take it, for there isn't another one here." David, I love this. "There is none like it," David said. "Give it to me." I mean, you kind of see at that moment David's corner of his mouth, his corner of his mouth turns up like, "Oh yeah, I remember that sword. Worked pretty well last time. It'll do. It'll do." And so he gives him Goliath's sword, which there, again, as he just said, there is nothing else like it in all of the land. And David flees. He goes to Gath. Now, Gath is a Philistine city. And he goes there because he knows Saul is chasing him. And so David is pretty bright. He thinks to himself, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to their city. It's where their king lives, King Achish, who's this really mean, crazy man. And I'm going to go there and I'm going to find refuge there because then Saul won't attack me there. And so David goes. I wish we had a whole week just to do this one narrative on this. But David goes there and he feigns insanity. He draws on the walls and on the floor, and he slobbers all over. He says he slobbers all over his beard, and he just makes himself look like a crazy man. And I'm now towards the end of 21. And this is Achish's response in verse 14. "Look, you can see this man is crazy," Achish said to his servants. "Why did you bring him to me? Do you have such a shortage of crazy people that you brought this one to act crazy around me? Is this one going to come to my house?" In other words, he's saying, "Hey, guys, crazy, we're all full up here on crazy, okay? Get rid of him. Get rid of him. I mean, he'd be a good trophy since he killed Goliath, but just get rid of him. I don't like the insanity thing." And so now David is again on the run, and we see not only is David on the run, but now Saul's hunger for his blood is getting greater, and he wants to kill him even more. And then now we're in chapter 22. And so David left Gath, and he took refuge at the cave of Adullam. And when David's brothers and his father's whole family heard, they went down and joined him there. In addition, every man who was desperate, in debt, or discontented, the 3 Ds, desperate, in debt, or discontented, rallied around him, and he became their leader. About 400 were there. Now, this is a big change in the scenario. Because up to this point, David is out there running by himself. It's easy to get up in the middle of the night, move. I don't have to explain anything, I don't have to do anything. But now his family shows up. Remember the same family that said, "Oh yeah, the little shepherd guy, he's the only one left." All the big warriors, they have figured it out. And so they come and they say, "David, we have nowhere to go. Surely Saul is going to find us and he's going to kill us on your behalf." And so David takes his family in. Of course he does. And then 400 others, and I love this, who were desperate, in debt, or discontent. It sounds like the kind of people you want to plant a church with. And so what they do is they show up and those because why? Because they're in debt. Sure, they're in debt. Of course they're in debt. God told them they would be in debt with the taxes of this king, Saul. And they were discontented. They felt surely there could be a better way to do all of this. And they were desperate. And David took them. He took them. And he became their leader. Love that. You see, it was never about how strong of a warrior you are for David, right? That was his whole life. He knew where the victory came from. And so he looks at these 400 men that are there for all the wrong reasons, and you just, but they're hungry for something. And he goes, okay, God, this is what you've given me. Let's go. Let's go do this. And so he takes them. And if you jump down to verse 11 in 22:11, and the king sent, this is now back to Saul, and the king sent messengers to summon the priest of Ahimelech, and he goes into all of that. And what happens is he gets word from Doeg. Remember Doeg, who was standing in the corner? He goes back and he tells Saul what had happened, that David was there. He maybe didn't hear the whole conversation, but he saw Ahimelech give him Goliath's sword. He saw him give him bread. And so Saul gathers everybody together, and he goes to Nob, and he gets all of the priests. They're all of this tribe, this Levitical tribe. There's 85 of them. And they're explaining what David did, and I didn't know David was, he said he was on a mission from you. But Saul looks at him and he says, you're lying. And I am going to show everyone in this country what happens to anyone who gives sanctuary to David. And he orders his guard to kill all of the priests of God, 85 of them. Kill them all. All of his guards look in there, they start looking at each other like, these are the priests of God. And they just say, no, we won't do it. And Doeg, of course. There's always a Doeg there. Doeg comes out, he goes, I'll do it. He pulls his sword and he just goes down the line and he kills 85 priests. And if you think that's bad, it's even worse than that. He kills the 85. Look at verse 19. And he also struck down Nob, the city of the priests, with the sword, both men and women, infants and nursing babies, oxen, donkey, and sheep. He wipes out the entire city. This is what happens when vengeance just overrides all of thinking. Well, David, we could go into other accounts at Keilah, and we could see some different things that happened there. But David, before all of that, before he runs to the next city, he gets word of this. Now, I want you to feel what David is feeling. Like, where do I hide? Where do I go? If I go into a city, even if they don't know what they're doing, Saul's going to destroy the city on my behalf. This is getting difficult because these are my people. I love them. So what do I do, Lord? What do I do? And so the Philistines were coming against this city, and David gets word of the city. I'm just going to tell the account right now. And so David gets word of it, and he inquires of the Lord. I love that. I love that David always inquires of the Lord. He prays and he says, give me the ephod. We got to inquire of the Lord and see what he wants to do. You know what it says in Psalm 119? It says, he says, Lord, I love your laws. I love your laws. Classically, if you study scripture in the Old Testament, the kings didn't love the laws of God. Most of them, not all of them. Most of them did not love God's laws. Why? Because they wanted to be the law. They wanted to be the law. And so David, again, knowing who the real king was, he studied the scripture. He prayed. He inquired of the Lord. And the Lord tells him, the Philistines are coming against this city. You go fight for the city. And he says, but Lord, if I do that, then I've got the Philistines and we'll be fighting them. And Saul is bearing down here my own army, my own people. What do we do? What will happen? And God says to him, I will give you victory, David, over the Philistines. And he routs the Philistines. And then David inquires of the Lord again. It's not enough. He's not partying. He inquires and he says, Lord, now I'm in this walled city. I'm kind of trapped here. Saul hears about it and Saul goes, perfect, I've got him. And he bears down on him with his army. And David asks the Lord, he says, will these people give me up when they're surrounded? Even after I saved them, will they give me up to Saul? And the Lord says, yes, they will. And so David runs with his men. And when Saul hears that he's left the city, he gives up and he goes home. See, this is happening over years now. I want you to understand this. This is a long, long time. Let's go. And I mean, if you continue to read, more people in verse 13, and David and his men numbered about 600 at this point because they had gained from this battle and they moved. Verse 14, and David stayed in the wilderness now. He's seen what Saul is doing to the cities. And so now he is in the wilderness. And I love this because as we're looking at all of these things and we're looking at the wilderness itself, we see so many great accounts of what happens in the wilderness. And so David, as they're there, we go to chapter 24. There's a couple of other ways God delivers him. I'll let you read those on your own. But I want to get to 24. And when Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, so what had happened, let me give you background so that makes sense. So he was pursuing David, and right when they had overtaken David, they had surrounded, they were ready to take him out. Word comes to Saul, and he says, you got to get home. Philistines are attacking us at home. He has to break it off and go home. Saul is really not happy, and clearly God is at work for David. And when Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told David is in the wilderness near En-Gedi. Now, this is a horrible place if you ever go to Israel. It is out by the Dead Sea. It is hot. It is nasty. It is desert, desert, desert. This is where David is. He is in the wilderness now because it's the only place he could not get everybody else killed that he tries to find sanctuary from. So now he'll find it in the wilderness. And it's in the wilderness. It's in the wilderness. God always does something amazing. Why is it that if you want to be like Jesus, if you want to be conformed to the very image of Jesus, he often does the greatest work in the wilderness. You ever notice that? Moses, 40 years in the wilderness. The Israelites, they're complaining their way. 40 in the wilderness. Jesus, after he's baptized, is driven into the wilderness to be tempted by Satan there. And so here we go. They're out now in the wilderness. And so Saul took 3,000 of Israel's fit young men. They could outrun them, is what he's doing. He's taking his special forces, and he went to look for David and his men in front of the rock of the wild goats. And when Saul came to the sheep pens along the road, a cave was there, and he went in to relieve himself. I don't write this. Okay? He had to go to the bathroom. And so he's got his 3,000 men, and there's a bunch of sheep. It's a very big cave because they're probably using it for lots of sheep as a pen. But David is in the cave, and there's all these caverns, and they go way back, and it's hidden there, and they're back there. And here goes Saul. He comes in to go to the bathroom. And David and his men were staying in the recesses of the cave. Verse 4. 24:4. And so they said to him, look, this is his men speaking to David. This is the day the Lord told you, I will hand your enemy over to you so you can do with him whatever you desire. And then David got up and secretly cut off the corner of Saul's robe. Now, you'd say, wait a minute, why was he probably took his robe off, laid it over a rock, is relieving him, and so David sneaks up and he cuts off. And you say, well, wait, how could he not see him? Well, if it's very bright, it's out in the desert, and you go into a dark cave, your eyes could not be just there's thousands of men out there, a lot of noise, all of this is all happening, and David goes up and he cuts the corner of Saul's robe. Verse 6, and he said to his men, I swear before the Lord, I would never do such a thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed. And I would stop there and go, wait a minute. David, is Saul the Lord's anointed, or are you the Lord's anointed?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And that's David's response. I will never lift my hand against him. Verse 7, for with these words David persuaded his men, and he did not let them rise up against Saul. Now, I want you to understand what this is really about, because on your outline, this is test number 1. It's the test of patience. Will David grab the throne? Now, let me explain. They're living and they're running for their lives. They're probably getting picked off here and there. And finally, these 600 people that were with David, they have got to be fed up. I got to tell you, I get it. This last week, we went camping as a staff. I haven't been camping in how many years, Les? I don't know. Gary was telling us he hasn't been camping in like 30 years or something. Crazy. I don't remember how long. It was ridiculous. And I remember why. I mean, I don't like sleeping in anyway. And I'm thinking about these guys. These men, and they're like, David, we've been following you. We've been doing it. This is our chance. Take him out. Take him out. God has clearly delivered him into your hands, David. He's yours. It's not a coincidence that he walks into the cave where we are. And they're absolutely right. But what they don't understand is this is a test to see if David will be that kind of king that what? Takes things into their own hands. And David says, after he cuts his robe, it says that his heart, his conscience bothered him for what he had done. Well, Saul finishes his business and he goes out and he grabs up all of his stuff and he goes out of the cave and he starts down the hill. And when there's enough distance, David comes out of the cave and he cries to him, my father, Saul. Saul turns around and he sees David and he holds up the corner of his robe. He says, I could have killed you. Why do you listen to the people around you telling you I hate you, telling you that I'm trying to kill you? I'm not trying to kill you. You are the Lord's anointed. And David there is holding this thing and he's saying, I will not take that shortcut. I will not do it. Now, clearly, Romans 13 had not been written till over 1,000 years later. But in Romans 13, Paul will write, and he will say this, 13:1, he says, all authorities have been established by God. All authorities. This is a hard one to preach on. I'm not going to preach on this, but I just going to make this statement. And so we are to honor the authorities. Now, we live in a democracy where we do have free speech and we can push back and we can do things, and I'm grateful for that. But I believe, as I have always believed, not just lately, I've always believed that we need to respect, we have got to respect the position, and this is what David is doing here. And he is saying, God put him there, and I'm not going to be the one to take him out. Certainly, I'm not going to take him out by force. Why? Because that would make David just another Saul. This would be the start down the road of the ends justifies the means. God's will, my way. And he will not do it. He will not do that. And so I'm not trying to make a joke out of this, but I did giggle in my office when I was studying this, because what he was saying is I'm not cutting corners. Well, he did, but he's not doing it in that way. He's not cutting the corner and I'm sure his men are going, David, by tomorrow night, we could be sleeping in the palace. I'm done with this dirt. I'm done with it. I'm done with this desert. And David says, no. God is working something in David. You see, because the wilderness is not just, when you find yourself in the wilderness, it's not just because there's a test there, although there are. Sometimes it just takes time in the wilderness. It takes the heat of the wilderness. And because the way we live our lives is, okay, if I pass the test, if I learn, God, then I get out of this wilderness. And I believe right now that some of you are in times and season. You're in a season of the wilderness right now in your walk with the Lord. You're in a season of wilderness, maybe with an illness. You're in a season of wilderness time. And you're asking the question, what are you trying to show me, God, so I can get it right and get out? And sometimes it's like, no, that's not the way you've got. Because what we do is we say, Lord, just show me, I'll learn it, and then I got it, and let's go. That's not the way it works. Sometimes you put all the ingredients into a cake, and it's all there, and then we know you got to put it in the oven, right? But to know that doesn't cook the cake. You put it in the oven and you cook it. And it takes time in the oven to do this. And so David is there, and he is not going to take the easy road. And I love this. I love this because he reflects, if you will, be careful of my words, his son that would come 1,000 years later. The one who would be called the Son of David. You see, Jesus is taken into the wilderness, and there Satan tempts him, and Satan says, Jesus, let's read it. Look, I think it's on the screen. Luke chapter 4, he says this, Satan. He said, so he took him up, and he showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. And the devil said to him, I will give you their splendor and all this authority because it has been given over to me. By the way, I don't know if you know that, but that's true. He could have done that. That is an actual true thing. We don't have time to explain all that right now. But authority had been given at that point, at the fall, to the enemy. That's why he's called the God of this earth. He's called the God of the air. Until Jesus dies at the cross and takes it back, he is the rightful God of this world. And so Satan is telling Jesus, you can cut the corner of the cross. You don't have to go. If you bow down right now and worship me, I will give you this authority because it's mine to give. Verse 7, if then you will worship me, it will all be yours. But here's the problem. It's absolutely true. Right there, right then, all authority would have been given to Jesus. But without the cross, ready? We would have all been lost. We would have all been lost in our sin. And so Jesus looks and he says, no. I will go through the cross because I've got to save those I came for. And David is doing the same thing here. David is sitting there and he's saying, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not taking the bait. I'm not going there. And so in many ways, he's going to pass this test. He is going to actually pass it. But here's the crazy part. Ready for this? In 2 chapters. So in this, he's tested to see if he'll grab power. 2 chapters later, almost an identical thing will happen again, and he'll be tested. But it's this thing in the middle. Chapter 25, and I'm going to go quick, so stay with me. It's about a guy, verse 2, a man in Maon had a business in let me just put it. He's really rich, this guy. His name is Nabal. Some people call him Nabal. Nabal. And he was there. He has been there for years. David has been hanging out in that region for a long, long time. And so David is there. And David, while they are there, his men have been protecting and they've been watching over all the people, because when the Philistines would come in, or it was a high crime area. And there was a lot of bandits, and they would go in at harvest time and they would steal from them. And so David's men had been there for years, and they just kind of watched over things. And so now it's harvest time. This is when they have their great feast. They've sheared the sheep, they've harvested, and there's this massive biggest party of the year. And now they're sitting there, and David sends word. He takes some of his guys. He says, you go to Nabal, and you be really respectful. And you say, hey, Nabal, we've kind of watched over things. We've been here for you. We're wondering, don't make extra, but after this huge feast is over, could we have some of the leftovers to feed ourselves? And Nabal just grinds them. He says, how dare you? Who are you? Who is David that you would come here and I never asked him to do this? You go back and he gives him the what for. And so these young men, they go back and they tell David. And David says, really? And he looks at his men and he says, strap up, boys, we ride. And he takes his sword and they all strap their swords on. And David is filled with fury and rage. And he says, God, forgive me if by tomorrow morning one male of Nabal's is left alive. We are going to kill every one of them because we blessed them and they cursed us. We go, and now they're raging. Now they're going. Look at verse 14. And one of Nabal's young men informed Abigail. Enter Abigail. This is an awesome woman. Nabal's wife. Look, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he screamed at them. And the men treated us very well. And when we were in the field, they weren't harassing. And nothing of ours was missing the whole time we were living among them. Verse 16. And they were a wall around us, both day and night. The entire time we were with them, herding sheep. Now consider, Abigail, what should we do? Because there is certain to be trouble in our master's. Trouble for our master and his entire family. I love this. He is such a worthless fool. Nobody can even talk to him. Verse 18. And Abigail hurried, taking 200 loaves of bread, 2 clay jars of wine, 5 butchered sheep. This is a lot of food, okay? She's not even Italian. A lot of food. Okay, I'm just telling you right now. 5 butchered sheep, jars of wine, a bushel of roasted grain, 100 clusters of raisins, 200 cakes of pressed figs, loaded them on donkeys. And then she said to her male servants, go ahead of me, and I will be right behind you. But she did not tell her husband, Nabal. And as she rode the donkey down the mountain pass, hidden from view, she saw David and his men, and man, they have blood in their eyes. They are coming for them. Verse 21, and David had just said, and we talked about that, not one of them's going to be left alive. Verse 23, and when Abigail saw David, she quickly got off the donkey and she knelt down with her face to the ground and paid homage to David. She knelt at his feet and she said, the guilt is mine, my Lord, but please let your servant speak to you discreetly. And the Lord, my Lord, should pay no attention to this worthless fool, Nabal, for he lives up to his name. His name has a dual meaning. I always thought, and it does mean fool, but it also means this. His name means stupid, and stupidity is all he knows. Hey, if somebody's naming their kid anything like this, not a good one. Back them off of that, all right? I, your servant, didn't see my Lord's young men, and she's going into this and she's laying it down. As surely as the Lord live and as you live, it is the Lord. Isn't this sound like David? It is the Lord, she says, who kept you from participating in bloodshed and avenging yourself by your own hand. May your enemies and those who intend to harm you, my Lord, be like Nabal. Let them be stupid. Let this gift your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow my Lord. Please forgive your servant's offense, for the Lord is certain to make a lasting dynasty for my Lord, because he fights the Lord's battles. Now watch what she does. This is brilliant. Throughout your life, may evil not be found in you, David. 29. Someone, isn't this interesting? Like everybody knows what's going on. Someone is pursuing you and intends to take your life. But my Lord's life is tucked safely in the place where the Lord your God protects the living. But he is flinging away your enemies lives like stones from a sling. Do you see what she just did? She took him back to when he was 14 years old, standing in front of a giant. And she says, David, you didn't fight for yourself. You don't need to do this. She's telling him to let God do this. And when the Lord, I love this. When, not if, when the Lord does for my Lord all the good that he promised you and appoints you ruler over Israel, there will not be any remorse or a troubled conscience for my Lord because of needless bloodshed or my Lord's revenge. And when, David, and when the Lord does good things for my Lord, may you remember me, your servant. And then David said to Abigail, blessed is the Lord God of Israel, who sent you to me to meet me today. May your discernment be blessed, and may you be blessed. Today you kept me from participating in bloodshed and avenging myself by my own hand. Okay, now stay with me. Stay with me on this. This is super important. For the first time ever, David is the dog. He is not the underdog. He's not the little shepherd boy watching the sheep that all of a sudden a mountain lion comes who's bigger, stronger, and God gives him power. He's not the little shepherd boy that then a bear comes that's even bigger and more powerful. And then a Goliath comes, and he's more. And then a Saul with all of his armies come. He's always been the underdog. And for the first time, David has the sword. By the way, whose sword did he put on? Yeah, he put on Goliath's sword. Really, David? Is that what you're going to be? Are you going to be Goliath now? You're going to power up because now, see, God has to test David. He has to say, what are you going to be like when you're king? Up to this point, you've been running for your life. You've been the victim. But now, David, I've got to see if you can handle the power, the authority, if you have mercy, if you have grace in you. And he doesn't. David is strapped up and he is going for it. And man, oh man. It says that Abigail, if you read earlier, it says she is beautiful outwardly and her wisdom is beautiful inwardly. David is on this road to becoming Saul. This is how it happens. For the first time, I've got the power. I've always been taken advantage of, and now that I have it, we'll see. David is full of himself, and he is empty of God right now on this road. And Abigail, I love this. She comes into his life and she says, "What are you doing? This isn't you, David. This isn't you." When you get even with somebody who has wronged you or abused you or stolen from you or hurt you, when you try to get even with them, what happens to you? You become like them, right? You're even with them. She is saying, David, get better. Be better than him. Be better than him. Go farther. I just love what she says. She takes him back. That's not you, David. She's asking him what he wants his story to be. I heard this, I think Andy Stanley said this one time. He said, what's your story going to be when all you have left is your story? What's your story going to be when all you have left is your story? She is looking at David and she's saying, David, right now, your story is being written. What you're going to read at the end of your life, this is your story. And you don't want it read that you were a bloodthirsty other king just like all the other kings, like Saul. John Maxwell, I read this thing this week from him. He said this, it'll be on the screen. He says, some people read their story and some write their story. Most people, they just get to the end of the life and they read their story because there was no intentionality. When you have an Abigail in your life, she stops you and she says, wake up. Don't be this way. This is not you. She, in fact, recovers for David the identity that God had given him, his original design. She pulls this out of him. I pray that you have an Abigail in your life. I'm very grateful for mine. I pray that there's somebody that knows you so well, they look at you when you get crazy and go, Mark, that's not you. That's not you. This is not what God's called you to. And by the way, Abigail doesn't have to be a woman. It can be a man. His name was Jonathan, and that's exactly what Jonathan did with David. I know I'm late. Hey, we covered 4 chapters. Come on. I mean, they were killing it. I just got to read. Band, come on out. I'm just, listen to this. I love this. And so David goes home, 37, read this. In the morning when Nabal sobered, so he goes home and he's throwing this party, it says earlier, fit for a king, and he's very drunk. He's just being an idiot. Verse 37, in the morning when Nabal sobered up, his wife told him these events, and his heart sank. It died, and he became like a stone. And about 10 days later, the Lord, notice, the Lord struck Nabal dead. And when David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, blessed is the Lord who championed my cause against Nabal's insults and restrained me, his servant, from doing evil. The Lord brought Nabal's evil deed back on his own head. I love this. And then David sent messengers to speak to Abigail about marrying him. I mean, the guy's dead. Is it too soon? Would you marry me? And if you read down a few verses, she gets 5 of her servants, mount up, we're riding. She marries David. I love it. Only the Bible. What's your story going to be? Some of you, if I could be, I don't know that I'm the voice of Abigail right now, but maybe you're in a position where for the first time you've got power. How will you use that in the people around you? How will you use it in your children? How will you use it as you serve around here? How will you use it at work? We're going to go to the table, and it's filled with broken bread and with juice that's been crushed from grapes. Brokenness and crushing. And we go, yay, Jesus, thank you, because you did that for me. And he says, when you come to this table, you come to a table of brokenness and crushing. He's trying to break us. He's trying to crush us, not for sin. He did that for us. But he's trying to break us so that he can use us and fulfill his promises in us. If that's your heart today, I invite you to the table. Come and take one of the elements, and then we'll take them together in a moment. You go as the Lord